All right. So if you're tuned in right now on Zoom or over on Instagram Live, I'd like to say welcome. My name's Philip Duff, and I'm privileged to do a lot of the education together with the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association. I'm going to be joined on this session by none other than the great and powerful Kenta Goto, long-term head bartender of the award-winning and much-missed Pegu Club here in New York and owner of the incredible Bar Goto and Bar Goto Niban bars here in New York City. He's going to be coming at us live from Bar Goto Niban in Brooklyn. We'll be talking about Shochu, doing a little rundown, a little Shochu 101. Then we're going to have a tasting, and then I'm going to hand it all over to Kenta, who's going to explain how he progresses from a tasting to the idea of a cocktail to making it into a reality. And then we'll wrap things up and point you towards the next Zoom and next year when there's going to be a competition with the Kyushu Shochu Association that could mean you going to Japan for a trip. And probably you haven't been on a lot of trips in the last year or two. So I think we can agree that would be an amazing thing. Everyone in? Excellent. So let's begin. I'm just going to put a little PowerPoint up here. This will be available afterwards for you to look at on shochu.guide. That's shochu.guide, the website of the JSS Shochu, Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association. And you should also follow at JSS_Shochu on Instagram. That's at JSS_Shochu on Instagram, which will keep you up to date on all the latest news about the cocktail competition, about Shochu Cocktail Week next year, and also about all the guest bartenders like Kenta that we will be having on the regular Zooms to showcase their way of working with Shochu in cocktails and hopefully inspire you to make some Shochu cocktails for your bar and your cocktail menus. So don't forget to follow JSS_Shochu on Instagram. And let's go back in history. The origins of Shochu are very, very old. The first mention of it is actually from a Portuguese sea captain who traveled by Japan in 1546, and he referred to the distilled liquor that people were drinking as araki, right? That was the closest term he could use to describe it. But one of the best historical facts that I like a lot is that in 1559, two workmen were hired by a priest to help repair a shrine, and they left behind graffiti, which you can still see today, reading, "The priest was so stingy, he wouldn't even give us any shochu." And that's the first written mention of shochu, all the way back in 1559. Now, shochu can be made in various different areas of Japan, but its sort of psychological heartland is the Kyushu region, the Ryukyu kingdom of southwestern Japan, centered around islands and places like Kagoshima, Okinawa, Miyazaki, Kumamoto, Oita, and so on. Now, as I mentioned, you can make it in a lot of places all around Japan, but this is where the oldest history comes from, and these are the places that shochu is most strongly associated with. Let's see. Now, you can make it. It's about 75% of all shochu is made from either barley, sweet potato, or rice. However, you can make it from 20 more different ingredients, as varied as brown sugar, all the way up to ginger, sesame seed, and seaweed. But remember, the vast majority of shochu is either made from barley, sweet potato, or rice. What's important to realize is that shochu undergoes a sort of dual parallel fermentation. Whatever base ingredient is that you use, it's first saccharified with Koji, which is an Aspergillus mold. What this does is converts starches into sugar, something you'll be very familiar with if you've ever studied the distillation of, well, anything. But what Koji also does is produces citric acid. This is important for two reasons. One, it wards off bacterial infection. Most shochu is made in a very warm tropical climate. And back in the day, you didn't want the wash getting infected in a time when you couldn't temperature control it. Second, high citric acid might make for something that as the fermented product you wouldn't want to drink. But as we know from studying other spirits like brandy and cognac, it leads to a delicious distillate. So once the Koji has converted starch into sugar, then the yeasts can do their work of converting the sugar into alcohol. Let's do a couple of quick definitions. Single distilled shochu, which is called honkaku, having previously been called otsurai, is pot still and bottled at 45% or less. Continually distilled, korowai, uses, of course, the column still, and that's bottled at less than 36% ABV. Now, just like anything else, like for instance, whiskey, you have blended versions too. So if you blend honkaku and korowai, you get konwa shochu. And depending on how much pot still, that is honkaku shochu, is in it, it's either called otsurai korowai konwa for 51% pot still or more, or korowai otsurai konwa for 49% pot still or less. There's actually been, in the last 20 or 30 years, a boom in single distilled honkaku shochu in Japan, and that is now spreading very quickly abroad as well. Once you've produced it, you can rest it in glass or ceramic or stainless steel, or you can actually age it in a wooden barrel too. If you make barley shochu and you age it in a wooden barrel, there's actually a certain degree of color that you can't let the shochu go beyond, because otherwise it might get confused with whiskey in Japan. Most shochu, and the ones that we're tasting today, and the ones that Kenta is mixing with, is bottled and sold at 25% ABV. And here's the thing you might not know. Shochu actually outsells sake in Japan. That's how big it is. Now, you might have heard of awamori. This is from the Ryukyu Islands, centered around Okinawa. And this is sort of the ancestor of shochu. So it's a single fermentation. So they put Koji and yeast in at the same time. Black Koji, long grain indica rice from Thailand, honkaku shochu. I know that's a lot to take in. And it's bottled at 40%. So it's very strong and traditional. And something about all shochu that's important is there's no added sugar and no carbohydrates. So we've talked a little bit about the raw materials and where they roughly come from. So of course, sweet potatoes came to Japan from the New World of South America. Rice tends to be used more in shochu in the central region, and barley, mugi shochu, is more common a little bit to the north. So we've talked about the introduction of the sweet potato and how it went from the Spanish and Portuguese adventurers who discovered it in South America to Spain, then India and the Philippines, and then up into Japan. But we should really devote a little bit of time talking about Koji. It's not incorrect to say that Koji is the real heart of shochu. That dual fermentation gives a depth of flavor and kinds of flavors that you simply couldn't get just with yeast. And we're also going today to taste a couple of different shochus made with different Koji. The first two use black Koji, more famous for depth and complexity. But the last one, Satsuma Hozan, uses a white Koji, which was only perfected really in the last century, but it can be used for a very gentle, subtle taste. Black Koji is very dependable and quite powerful, really. And yellow Koji will give a more sort of a fruity type of taste. And of course, everybody tries to engineer their own Koji in their own way for unique flavors and taste, much like distillers do with yeast. So how do you use this Koji stuff? Well, the Koji is fungal spores that have to sit on a host, and they could sit on any host, right? But rice is very, very common. This is a Koji room. You inoculate the host, usually rice, but it doesn't have to be, and you leave it in these stacked wooden boxes at a very specific warm temperature until they grow up enough and multiply that you have enough that they are going to be able to sacrifice whatever raw ingredients you're using, whether it is sweet potato, barley, rice, sugar, kelp, ginger, sesame seed, whatever it may be. Then you're going to mix it all up, but we haven't added the base ingredient yet. What we're trying to do is get the Koji to multiply and actually go a little bit crazy, as it were, so that finally, when we add in our base ingredient, it devours it and it produces from the starches, sugar, and a lot of citric acid, which is going to really help develop a depth and range of flavor. Then all we need to do is add our yeast, and fermentation continues just like with almost any other spirit. After you have distilled it, and we'll come back to talking about distilling in a moment, but after you've distilled it, like we said, you can rest it in stainless steel, which dates back to the 1920s. You can rest it in ceramics. These are very, very common. And I visited at least one distillery that actually makes its own ceramic vessels in its own sort of pottery workshop. Or you could age it in a wooden barrel. Now, ceramics are, of course, the oldest tradition, and they could sit in ceramic for a very, very long time. They can also be bottled and then aged underground. For instance, this is a traditional aging cave near a Shochu distillery that I visited. They dug the cave and you go down and down and down. It's kind of like going to Hogwarts. And then there are thousands and thousands of 1.8 liter bottles of Shochu. Because when you buy the bottle, the distillery will age it for you. You can leave it there as long as you like and come back whenever you wish and open it, having been conditioned in the bottle. It's very common that you do this when you get married or you have a baby, and then years later you can come back and enjoy both the memory and, more importantly, the shochu. So all those labels that you see there are notes about a particularly important event in somebody's life, like having a baby. I think that baby is probably about 20 years old now. So there's only a couple of standard ways of mixing shochu in Japan itself. There is, of course, straight up or on the rocks. There's mizuwari with water and oyawari with warm or hot water, and of course, sodawari. I would be remiss if I didn't point out how incredible oyawari is. Very simply, shochu with warm or hot water in a 2/3, 1/3 ratio, roughly. This is incredible. And we're mailing out the shochu samples to you today. I'm sorry they didn't get out in time. Supply chain issues. This is what we say in 2021. But when you get them, by all means, have a nosing and a tasting like I'm going to do in a moment. But please, 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 mix them with a little hot water. There's no other spirit I've ever tasted that so transforms with the simple addition of hot water. You don't need sugar or a lemon zest or some bitters or anything. Just shochu with warm or hot water. There is also what's called the chuhai. You might have heard of this, which is a shochu highball. And it's almost more popular as a canned RTD in Japan than as a fresh mix made at a bar. You can buy chuhais, very kind of simple, think of it almost like a flavored vodka soda, on every street corner, in vending machines, at convenience stores. It is a massive, massive category, and it tends to emphasize the column distilled and more neutral style of shochu, whereas cocktails, mizuwari and oyawari, tend to be made more with honkaku shochu, which is to say the pure pot still shochu. So enough of that. It's time for a tasting. I'm going to ask you to live vicariously through myself and Kenta here. Kenta, are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Excellent, mate. Excellent. So we are going to start off with this remarkable shochu, Heihachiro, named after Japan's greatest naval admiral, the admiral who is sometimes called the Nelson of Japan. He studied in England and fought very bravely in various wars. So it's from Miyazaki. It's the oldest shochu distillery in Miyazaki. It dates back to 1834, as you can see. And like all the shochus today, it's about 84% sweet potato, 16% rice, black koji, atmospheric pressure. So just before we taste this, I did promise I'd tell you a bit more about distilling. So honkaku shochu is all pot still. And pot stills, as you know, can vary a lot. I've seen some pot stills in Japan with 3 little plates just above the pot. So it's almost like a combination pot still, column still. I've seen ones that are horizontal, like a submarine with 6 line arms coming off them, modeled on a Canadian vessel. And starting in the 1950s, quite a few Japanese distilleries started using what's called low pressure distillation, where you use a vacuum pump to suck out all the atmospheric pressure so you can distill at a lower temperature and get a more delicate flavor than is otherwise possible. So our first shochu today is atmospheric pressure, 25%, and it's their own organic sweet potato strain, the kotobuki, which is from their own farm. So when I nose this is very delicate. And it's got a subtle, long, and faintly bitter and structured palate. It doesn't have as much of the generally powerful roasted potato that you get a lot from sweet potato shochus, but this is a really well-made shochu. Kenta, what do you think?
Savory and earthy, but it's very light. I guess that's because it's only 25% ABV.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're mixing with all the 25% ABV shochus today, because even though maybe as bartenders we like the 40, 41, 42% shochus, and there are some very, very great ones out there, this is the biggest category of shochu, that around 24 to 25% alcohol. So it would be silly not to use them. And just like you said, I think this is a very delicate style or delicate brand of shochu, and extremely well made. But we'll put that aside for a moment and move on. Whoops. I'm not able to move on my PowerPoint. There we go. To the Kozuru Kuro. So this is from Kagoshima, not too far away. Again, 84% potato, 16% rice, black koji and atmospheric. And they've got their own style of sweet potato as well, the Kogane Sengan. And they use one of those horizontal stills. I've actually visited this distillery. They also make incredible gin. And believe it or not, one of the sons studied in Scotland, and they're making some really impressive whiskey as well. But back to this, Kozuru Kuro, 24%. Now I'm getting more of a robust, that roasted potato for American listeners, you know, not even unlike a roasted squash. And it's really backed up with, it's kind of muscular. What do you think, Kenta?
Compared to the first one, Heihachiro, This one's, it's almost touched sweeter and much milder. I'd say this is definitely easy to drink.
Do you mean the Heihachiro or the Kozuru Kuro?
I'm talking about Kuro. The second one is much milder and touch sweeter than the first one, Heihachiro.
Exactly. And this is a very, big, large distillery. They're very successful. So for a lot of people, this is potato shochu in Japan. And on to our last one, also from a big company, the Nishi Distillery in Kagoshima, the oldest Kagoshima distillery. This time 83% sweet potato and rice. They're using the same potato varietal as Komasa Kuro, but now it's white Koji. And white Koji, it actually took some sort of engineering to be powerful enough to use in shochu, right? So it's let's say the newest type of Koji that we're using in shochu, but it gives a very unusual and delicate flavor. So let's see what we get from this, the Satsuma Hozan. The Nishi Distillery does different special editions of Hozan brand, but this is their general one, which is a bestseller throughout Japan. I detect a lovely kind of a citric edge to this that I can only attribute to the use of white Koji. And it's very integrated all the way through. It's difficult to pick out individual flavor elements. What do you get when you give it a nose and a taste, Kenta?
This one's, definitely earthy, but I get the aroma of like roasted sweet potato. I find this one most aromatic.
Interesting, yeah. When I go back and taste them, you're right. I get more of a sort of toast aroma from the Kuro Komasa. And then I get something a lot more subtle and clean from the Heihachiro. So yeah, comparatively, that aroma, that roasted potato is really powerful here. I should tell everybody that I once helped chop up the potatoes on a production line in Japan for a sweet potato shochu distillery. And I was the youngest person doing it. Everyone else was like 80 years old, really a grandmother. And they were so much better than me. I had to stop after 2 minutes because it was embarrassing. So cutting up the potatoes and putting them in is a real art. And it starts just with that. Anyway, as I promised you, all your samples are being mailed out, so soon you'll be able to conduct your own tasting of these. The PowerPoint will be available on www.shochu.guide, and an edited version of this whole Zoom Instagram Live will also go up very soon. So follow the Instagram of @JSS_shochu. That's @JSS_shochu, and you'll be able to review it, look at the tasting notes, and work out if you agree, and maybe also come up with your own tasting notes.